Relax, son. Close one eye. Keep focused on your target. My father spoke calmly from behind me. I tried to do as he said, letting my muscles relax. When I closed, ending the double vision I had from having the rifle's sight so close to my gaze. That's good, he continued. Now, when you're ready, hold your breath. Don't hold it for too long, or you're going to start shaking. Just enough. Then, slowly squeeze the trigger down, like you're milking a cow. I had to chuckle at that. Dad, I've never milked a cow before, I spoke, as I glanced up to him. He furrowed a brow and adjusted the baseball cap on his head. Well, that's how my dad described it to me. You know what I mean. I smiled a bit and shook my head. It wasn't the first time my dad described how to shoot to me, or the second, or even the third. He tended to repeat himself sometimes. I didn't mind, though. I looked back to the target through the sight and concentrated. I still took everything he said in. I relaxed, letting muscles loosen enough. I shut one eye, focusing on that bullseye down at the end of the barrel. Held my breath in my throat. Slowly, I squeezed the trigger down. The rifle jumped in my hands, jerking heavily as it bounced back. My head jerked backwards, a bit uneasy of the weapon as it leapt up. I was still a bit nervous since the last time I went to the range, and the scope smacked me in the eye, bruising and cutting the brow. I couldn't see from where we stood at the shooting range station, but I felt good about the shot. My dad leaned into the spotting scope we had set up and looked through it. A small nod, and I saw a smile curl on his lips. Not bad. Take a look. I rose up and shifted to look through the scope myself. It was a bit of a moment to focus through it before I could see a small black hole in the target down at the other end of range. It wasn't a bullseye, being just a bit high to the left end of the center. My dad nodded and placed a hand on my shoulder. If that was a deer, it'd have been a clean hit. I smiled at his words and turned back to him. Think I actually have a shot at hitting something this weekend? He shrugged his shoulders and then let out a breath. It's possible, he said. We'll sure as hell try. Now, see if you can actually hit the bullseye this time. I chuckled and shook my head. And back to the station I went. I lifted the rifle up and focused again. Maybe, with a bit of luck, we might come back with something on this hunting trip. That'd be a change. I haven't shot since that day at the rifle range. I wasn't too worried, though. Apparently, I was a pretty decent shot. No bullseyes, but, hey, close enough, really. And I was getting used to the 300 short mag Browning rifles my dad got for us. They packed a hell of a kick, but with the padded stocks and the firm grips, you could keep them under control. My dad had been planning this trip for a while and got the two Brownings specifically for it. The plan was that my dad, my Uncle John, and I, John, would head up to this out in the middle of nowhere place where my dad used to hunt with his father and do the same for the weekend. To be honest, I wasn't really big on the whole outdoors thing. It meant too hot in the day, too cold at night, bugs everywhere, and a constant, overwhelming feeling of needing a shower. However, I wanted to do it for my dad. My father, Fred, wasn't doing all that hot. Recently, he had cancer and a severe case of vasculitis. It really knocked him down a few notches. A couple years ago, I remembered a strong and fearless man who could take someone down with just a hard stare. Now, he was immensely different. A lot skinnier, he had the look of a man who had stared real death in the face. It rattled him and made me realize that I may not have very much time with this man. Probably that was what my uncle was thinking as well. John wasn't my dad's brother, but my mom's. He was a bit more of the city type, like me. He taught at one of the local high schools and developed into a number of random hobbies. Lately, it had been photography. Even as we drove up, I could see that he had a fancy new Nikon DSLR camera set about his neck and the strap. We brought 3 guns with us, 2 Brownings and my dad's old 30-30. But we didn't expect John to shoot anything unless it was with his camera. I figured the only real reason my dad brought along his 30-30 was because of the nostalgia rather than for all of us to shoot. It was the gun he used with his father, and he kept it like it was brand new. Even with the proper care and maintenance, it was still old, and the new brownies were much more solid. He even got them set up with brand new scopes and shoulder straps. The works. If a deer came across our path, we'd have our gear to take it down. We arrived at our hunting ground in the afternoon. It was a few hours from where we lived, and then another hour driving along a dirt and gravel road. That was the most boring car ride ever. The car couldn't go more than 15 miles per hour on the road with all the bumps and dips. Finally, we reached our spot, which turned out to be a bit of a clearing in the middle of a large group of trees. I don't remember the exact location, just that it took quite a ways to get there. We set our camp up just along a single tent for all three of us and unpacked some of our gear. John made sure to grab some of that nice camping cooked gear, and my dad had pre-cooked some ribs and chicken that we'd just have to warm up. The first thing we did after setting up was eat. "So, Fred," John began as he munched on some ribs, "what are the odds of getting a deer out here?" "As good as anyone else's," my dad shrugged. There was a bit of a pause before John spoke again. "Let's say we get a deer. Then what do we do then?" John quirked a brow as he focused on my dad. It seemed an innocent question, but I knew where it was going. The question meant, if we got a deer, how did we plan on taking care of that heavy thing in the middle of the brush? Or, more specifically, how did my dad plan on taking care of it? John's a good guy, but he might have been overly concerned for my dad. My dad lost a lot of his strength in the hospital, but he wasn't feeble yet. And my dad hated it when people thought he was. "We'll lug it up and carry it back here," he spoke shortly. A bit of annoyance slipped into his voice. "David can handle it, right, son?" He asked me with a bit of a smile. I returned it with one of my own and nodded. "Yeah, I can take care of it. I'm stronger than I look." My dad's smile grew and John shrugged his shoulders. We finished soon after the sun was starting to show the first signs of beginning to sink down towards the horizon. "You know, we'll have a couple of hours before it gets dark," Dad said as he gazed up at the sky. "You want to take a bit of walk and see if we get lucky?" "Sure," I replied quickly. "Why not?" John nodded in agreement, and soon the three of us were trudging off into the trees. Only Dad and I carried our guns, both of us wielding brand new brownies. John was just content on having his camera. Dad moved on through the thin path leading the way as he seemed to recall memories of himself and his father. I trudged along behind him, my rifle slung about my shoulder. John had the rear, his hands lingering near his camera. Every once in a while I'd hear the soft click as he'd shoot a picture of some sort of eye-catching scenery while we walked. We didn't find much. No deer, and hell, we didn't even see any animals except random birds and the hordes of bugs. I was just starting to get tired and my legs began to hurt. It had been a long day and I wanted nothing more than to go sit down and relax a bit before conking out. The cold started to set in as the sun sunk lower, nipping at me through the jacket. Dad pushed on before he stopped and bent down. "Find something?" I asked as John and I both came up and looked down at the ground. My dad pointed at something in the soft dirt, a set of cloven tracks pressed down on the dirt, running along the path for a bit. "Deer tracks," he smiled a bit and rose carefully, moving to follow them along the path. "They go along here and then..." He trailed off as he furrowed a brow and crouched back to the ground. "Then?" I asked, as John and I approached. Dad once again pointed to the ground. We could see what he was looking at. The print suddenly shifted and seemed to move toward the forest, off the path. But that's not what was unusual. There were two more footprints in the dirt next to the deer's, pointed in the direction the deer ran off. "That a bear?" John asked my dad while he focused on the two prints in the earth. I thought they might be from a bear myself, but they looked odd. My dad noticed it too. The bear prints have a distinct shape, where the paw lands in the dirt with 5 toes, though you might miss the little one depending on how the bear was moving. These prints had only 3 toes and an elongated print where the base of the paw fell. Claw marks above the 3 toes dug deep into the ground. It almost seemed like if you gave a person 3 toes instead of 5 and threw on some thick, deadly claws, then he would make this footprint. And the size of them didn't make me feel all that comfortable looking at them. Not the right shape. Dad finally spoke as he stood. It's not a mountain lion either. Bigfoot? I asked with a little bit of a nervous chuckle. I tried to lighten the darkening mood. Well, they say he could be out here, Dad remarked with a bit of a grin, though I could tell he was only joking back with me to raise the mood as well. All three of us could feel it, an uneasiness that was starting to set in. A chill ran through me as I stared at those prints, and not from the cold. Maybe we should call it a day before it gets too dark, Sean suggested. Nobody argued. We turned and began to move back towards the path. I kept a hand on the shoulder of the strap of the rifle, ready to slip it off if I needed to. I noticed Dad was doing the same. We didn't say much when we got back. John started a fire before it got too dark, and the three of us sat around it for a while. As night fell, it actually seemed rather peaceful. I could hear the light chirps of crickets in the woods and even the flutter of some nighttime birds fly away. Light chat began to start up again, and we found ourselves forgetting about those weird prints. John and my dad spoke about random things like shows they watched on TV or the memories of my dad in this area. I sat back and just relaxed. Even though I was a city boy, it seemed nice to get out with my family. I could tell my dad was enjoying himself. He seemed fuller, much more alive. Maybe the memories of good times were helping him recover. I hope that by making some more helped him too. We went to bed not long after that. John put out the fire and the dark began to fall over the camp. Only the stars and the moon shedding enough light for us to get comfortably in the tent. As I drifted off to sleep in my sleeping bag, I noticed one thing though. Maybe I was just too tired to really care, or my mind forced me to ignore it, but it seemed strange when the sounds of the forest seemed to stop. Crickets ended their song, and the shifting of hidden nocturnal animals ended. I feel a familiar easiness building back in my stomach, and sleep calmed me. The same feeling I had when we all gazed upon those strangely shaped tracks with the claws that seemed to sink deep into the earth below. I woke up from a dreamless sleep to a smell that flew in and hit me right in the face. Bacon. I rose from my sleeping bag, slipped into a new set of clothes, and moved outside of the tent. John stood at the camping fire he got, frying up a fresh batch of bacon while my dad double-checked the guns, making sure they were ready for today's trek. "Morning, David," John spoke with a grin as he held up the pan. "Almost done here. Got some eggs, too." Oh, bacon and eggs in the woods? I wasn't complaining. We ate breakfast happily, joking around a bit and fantasizing about all the different ways we were going to cook the deer we were sure to nab on this trip. Last night's weirdness was completely forgotten. After breakfast, we cleaned up and Dad handed me one of the Brownings. "You ready for the sun?" he asked with a bit of a smile. I nodded and took the rifle or slinging it over my shoulder. "Oh yeah. Be good to get an early start in this time, too." Both father and son readied their weapons as John made sure that his camera was fully set for the day. He even snapped a photo of the two of us grinning at the camera. I felt good. It had been a while since my father and I had gotten to do something, and really do something together. This time in the hospital had been a long and stressful time. I still remember walking into his room and seeing him hooked up with all those machines and the look that screamed, "Help me," but I couldn't do a goddamn thing. And before that, we had a bit of a rough patch. Just stupid years of me being a dumb teenager leading up to being a dumb young adult. Now I felt closer to him than ever, and I felt like we were building up the family again. I'll never forget that feeling. Then we strode off into the wild. Dad on point and John taking up our rear. We moved along the path again, our eyes peeled for anything moving in the woods, and ears listening for the slightest sound. Overall, it was a quiet morning that led into a quiet afternoon. We walked and moved, climbing over fallen trees that obscured our path, or slipping through overgrown areas where the plants worked to reclaim areas that man and animal, mostly animal, trudged through. I admit I was starting to get bored and tired. You can only walk so long and not see anything before you get a bit dispirited. Dad didn't show any signs of exhaustion, though. Even after getting out of the hospital this soon, he moved like he had a purpose. I figured we'd eventually come across a tree a bit too large or an overgrown path a bit too thick, but he moved on through word without complaint. It turned out to be worth it after all. We stopped, and my dad helped up a hand, both John and I halting in awkward poses as we immediately put our feet down in mid-walk in the distance. It took me a moment to see what he was looking at. It was hard to make out, though, the brush and trees, but I could see the light brown form of a deer. It stood off in the distance, though, the trees lightly grazing on some on the ground, and with our luck, it was a buck. Two sets of large antlers rose from its head, tall and proud before they broke off into two branches apiece. A forked horn, my dad would call it. It didn't seem to see us yet. My dad looked at me and gave me a grin as a hand motioned to the rifle on my shoulder. "Want to take the shot, son?" he whispered to me. My hand lingered over the rifle before I slipped it off. The gun felt heavy in my hands then, much heavier than at the range. The shot seemed so far, and the brush was all over. No, I said as I shook my head, a bit of embarrassment flooding over me. "You do it, Dad." "I don't know if I can hit it that far away." He hesitated and nodded as he turned back, unslinging his own rifle and raised it up. I was hoping he wouldn't be disappointed that I couldn't take up the shot. I just didn't want to ruin this moment by missing. Finally come across a deer, and I screw it up by failing at my shot. Dad would get it, though. I knew it. He looked up, and I could almost see him silently cursing to himself. He was looking for a place to balance his rifle on. Right now, there wasn't anywhere very convenient, so you always want to make sure to steady your rifle. He drilled that fact into me. Standing up with the rest was the worst way to do it. Only do it if you have to. And if you have to, at least remember everything else. You'll need every advantage to hit something without any kind of rest. My dad ended up moving to sit down on his rear in the dirt, his knees rising up. That way wasn't as good as finding a rest for your gun, but you could use your knees to steady both your back elbow and your front as you aimed. The deer's head rose and began to look about. Our welcome was thinning out. Dad aimed down the sight and heard him take a short breath, not daring to let it out. His fingers slowly fell upon the trigger. The shot rang out as I saw the buck jerk and stumble in distance. It staggered for a moment, then burst off in a sprint through the trees away from us. Dad rose and lifted his head, looking after it. John and I finally made our moves to step to it. "You get it, Fred?" John asked as he looked in the distance. "I don't think you got it." "Oh, I got it," Dad said with a confident smirk on his face. I got him." He looked to me and I smiled back. The deer seemed like it was hit, but I couldn't tell. I'd rather think my dad got him than missed. Should we go after it?" I spoke as I looked off in the spot the deer had been. "Oh yeah," Dad replied as he began to push off, the rifle slung back over his shoulder. It couldn't have gone too far. As so, we through the bush we went, three of us searching for the wounded deer. When we came across a spot it had lingered in, the result was clear. A fresh patch of blood had covered a nearby tree and was splashed on the dirt in the ground. Dad had just grinned and sent an old "I told you so" look over to my uncle before he took a few steps. Sure enough, in the direction the deer ran off, and another splash of blood had stained the earth. "Got him," my dad said with a triumphant pump of a fist. "Now let's get him back. He's not going to be too far, I bet." The blood trail led for a good distance. At times there were sections where I lost the trail completely. I couldn't even tell if we took a wrong turn or if the deer had maybe stopped bleeding. My dad kept right on it, and sure enough, we'd find a splash of brownish red that mixed in with the dirt. The trail led straight to an overgrown set of brush. that appeared trampled and squished, like something hard fell on it. A large pool of blood splattered all over those plants and sunk into the earth below them. It seemed like the clear idea was that the deer had staggered here and then collapsed onto the brush. But no deer. Only the blood and torn up plants indicated that something heavy and bleeding had fallen here. My dad, again, once adjusted the ball cap on his head and moved up to investigate. "That's weird. Looks like he should have been right here," he commented as he ran along one of the bloody plants. "I don't think he could have gotten up after falling with a hit like that." John and I stepped forward to look as well. It did seem like something had fallen here. It had to have been the deer. What else was recently wounded and bleeding? John was the first to notice something strange. He had moved around the back of the brush and found an area behind it trampled to the ground. Blood streaked along the leaves in the ground below before moving off into the woods, like something was being dragged. John waved my dad over, who took a look with a thoughtful gaze. "You think something took off with it?" John questioned. "Maybe, but this quick? It doesn't seem possible," Dad sighed and shook his head. I stood back, both curious and nervous, the memory of a certain set of footprints coming back into my head. "Let's take a look," John suggested after a moment. "It shouldn't be too far." Curiosity must have gotten the best of us, and we began in that direction of the blood streaks. They were very different from the splotches we saw on the way here. Instead, the more circular splatters, each bit of blood trail rolled along the earth, was curving line before stopping only to resume again a few feet onward. I didn't notice the chirping birds and animals stopped, or the cease of the buzzing of insects. I did notice the faint sound of something squishy being torn. Dad must have heard it too, and he slipped the rifle off his shoulder, as we all hunkered down and moved as silently as we could. I was the first to see it, and dear God, I was thankful for the brush. Otherwise, I might have seen all of it head-on in the daylight. In the distance, through the trees, appeared a creature crouched down over something. It was hard to make out through the brush in the distance, but I could distinctly see a brownish-black fur or skin in the muzzle. All three of us stopped and watched in awe and silence. As I looked closer, I thought I could see that the fur only seemed to be in patches on it, and there looked to be blood starting to coat areas of it. I leaned over and bit down into something on the ground, which was the deer. I could see it, a bit of those forked antlers sticking up. I also saw what I thought was a hand raise up, large scythe of claws gleaming on 3 fingers of a hand, before it lowered to dig down and tear more meat. I felt sick, like I was going to throw up. This thing made those tracks for me. I knew it. Dad was looking off in quiet shock, while John seemed to finger his camera, debating whether or not to take a picture. It was then that the creature snapped its head up and caught my first look at the gleaming, bloodshot red eyes. It stared directly at us. A screech then emitted from it, a high-pitched and grating, like the vibrating of a sound was causing part of its inner throat to tear apart. It then launched itself in our direction, still screeching that ghastly sound. My dad rose to his feet, angled the gun, standing, and yelled something to me and John. I assumed it was run because John turned and took off. I rose and held my ground as Dad fired a shot that I knew would miss. Through those trees, and that thing was a moving target. He'd be lucky to hit it with a rest, but standing? No chance. The shot did cause the thing to veer off into the trees toward our right side. That's when my dad turned and began to run himself. I bolted off with him, my heart pumping into my throat as I ran. I could hear the trees crashing to our right side, then our left. Could it switch that quickly? That screech emitted once again, and this time I felt like the terrified deer running through the woods as impending death loomed over him. I don't know how long Dad and I ran for, but enough that I felt my legs start to cramp up and my breath, and I began to wheeze. Dad wasn't looking too hot either. He stumbled and gulped in ragged gasps. His recent issues mustn't have been finally catching up. Still, he pushed on, and I did with him. I never left his side, even as he slowed. Like hell I was going to leave him while that thing was chasing us. I could tell he wanted me to push forward, but to leave him and escape on my own? My mind went to a joke that my dad used to tell of two campers. One brings running shoes. The other asks why he brought running shoes if he expected to outrun a bear. His friend answers, "No, I just have to outrun you." Well, this wasn't a joke. I don't know how we managed it, but soon after the two of us burst into our campsite, gasping and wheezing for air, Dad coughed up and moved over to the car, leaning against it with an arm up. He coughed and spat as I bent over and gasped. I looked up to see him still coughing and lurching, and I felt my stomach twist. He wasn't doing well. Slowly, I came over and put a hand on his shoulder. "Dad?" I asked quietly. Are you okay?" "Yeah," he spoke in a ragged voice between coughs. "Just, I'm okay. Are you okay?" Heh. Still worried about me when he was the one that looked like he would cough up a lung. I'm all right," I assured him before I lifted my head. That's when I realized something as I looked at our solitary campsite. John was nowhere in sight. I stepped away from my dad, my eyes looking around the camp. It looked untouched, just the way we left this morning. But John wasn't here. I looked back to Dad, who seemed to finally recover and push himself away from the car. "John's not here," I told him as I looked around. Dad cursed and gazed, wandering back to the woods where that creature had been. My eyes followed him when I swallowed down some of the bacon and eggs that tried to come back up. "You think he's out there? You think that thing? We'll find him." My dad cut me off as he drew in a breath. "He got some fresh water ready for us and some food. Make sure you got ammo," he commanded. I didn't question him. I moved and refilled our canteens with water and stuffed some of the quick snack foods we brought with us into small bags. I double-checked my ammunition and found my clips still full. I hadn't fired a shot. Dad moved into the car and pulled out a box of 300 short mag rounds before setting it on the hood. The clip in his rifle came out to replace the two shots he fired swiftly before oddly hesitating as he went to slip the clip back in. Instead, he turned to me and extended the clip out. "Here, son, that'll give you an extra one." He did firmly as I gave him an odd look. "Dad, what about you?" as I lifted my hand back to take the full clip from him. He turned back toward the car, reaching in again, soon slipping out his old 30-30 rifle. Without a second thought, he began to load with the ammo from an old beat-up 30-30 box he had brought with him. I shook my head and came up next to him. "No, Dad, that's old. We're going to need power if we come across that thing. We have short magnum, Dad. The 30-30 is my gun," he replied quickly and curtly. "It's reliable. I used this gun for 30 years and it still shoots like it's brand new." "I know it, and it'll be plenty. Besides, you got the short mag." After loading the rounds, he turned to put a hand on my shoulder. "You can take care of it. Now are you ready?" I looked away from him into his woods. The same woods which before the moment did not seem so dark and ominous. Even in the daylight, the trees seemed to suck up the light like a vampire, leaving the shadows where a sickening, patchy, furred monster might be waiting to creep up on us and tear us apart. "We're going after John?" I asked, as I kept my gaze focused towards the forest, trying to pierce the darkness and hoping I wouldn't find two bloodshot eyes staring back at me. "We're going to get him back." Oh, deep breath, and I nodded before slipping the extra clip into my pocket. My hands went down to unsling the rifle from my shoulder. I finally looked back to my father. "Okay," I spoke with a voice coming out much quieter than I meant it to be. "Let's go." Our search began in late afternoon, while the sun seemed like it was losing a battle of staying high in the sky. Journeying back into those woods while that thing was still out there terrified me like hell. I had already witnessed it tearing apart the deer, and now John was missing. I secretly hoped he just got lost on the way back and we'd find him trying to get back to the path. I hated to think I was hoping he was just lost, but the alternative meant that monster. I forced those thoughts from my head. Gripping my rifle tightly, my eyes wandered over to Dad. As he moved, he stepped swiftly and carefully, my eyes looking about him. Every once in a while, he stopped and would just listen before moving on. I was glad he had that hunting experience. It would really help us now. Still, I could tell he was nervous. The hands that gripped his trusty rifle were gripping too tightly and shaking just a bit. Oh, Dad. I had that same fear in me, too. The sky grew darker, and still we searched. Thankfully, the most I heard and saw were bugs and small animals scurrying about. No creature yet. That didn't mean it was still out there, watching and waiting. Suddenly, I saw Dad stop and bend down near a large tree. Moved after him carefully and quietly as I could. Reached down and picked up what looked like to be the mango remains of the DSLR camera. It looked crushed. The body smashed in, the lens broke off. The worst thing was that I could see the smears of blood that covered the neck hanger. I couldn't hold it back anymore. I turned to the bench. My body fell over as it oozed what remained of my bacon and eggs in the stomach all over the forest ground. Dad didn't say anything. He just looked up and sighed. We knew. We both knew. As I knelt on the ground trying to recover, I saw my dad rise to his feet and step off through the trees. A few long breaths and I pulled myself up after him, composing myself before sprinting after him. We walked for a ways, every once in a while glancing down towards the ground and then looking up. I didn't dare look. I knew he was following it. I just didn't want to believe it. It was long before the smell hit me. The copper scent of fresh blood stung at my nostrils, and I held my breath. No, this wasn't it. We were going to find a deer, a bear. Well, anything. Not this, though, not this. I tried to calm myself down, just lied to myself. We soon found John. My dad tracked the blood smears, and I refused to look at two, a large one splattered against the tree. He was slumped over in the branches hanging down as drops of blood fell from the base of the tree mixing with the wood and dirt. I could only look for a moment before I had to turn away, but it was enough to see the gorge marks running along his arm that hung limply over the branch, swaying in the light and wind, and bits of flesh and intestine that threatened to spill out with the slightest movement. My dad grimaced and curled his lip. He stared up, and I could see the moisture building in his eyes. He looked from the tree and over to me, and I knew what was going through his head. John's dead. My uncle and his brother-in-law is dead. And the two of us were still stuck here with the killer. I was in danger. I knew that he was seen in his head. Dad saw me, hung up in that tree, blood dripping from a lifeless body. He turned away quickly and reached a hand to grab my shoulder. "We're leaving," he said so quickly and quietly it took me a moment to understand. Already he began to drag me through the trees toward the camp. I moved along listlessly in a daze and recent events. It was getting to be too much. One of us was already dead, and we could very well join him soon. I bit back tears and moved faster. I wanted out. I wanted home. I wanted away from this sickening thing. Darkness swiftly poured in. I didn't realize how long we were searching and how quickly night fell upon this area. As the darkness fell, our pace increased. Soon, it almost felt like we were running back to camp. My thoughts wandered back to this afternoon. I nearly choked as the fresh memory of that creature screeching and barreling after us rose up in my head. I could almost hear it out there, running along with us through the trees, ready to pounce and rip us to shreds. I let out a sigh of relief when me and my dad slipped back into the camp clearing. He didn't hesitate. He took one last look around for John, then moved to the car. "What about our stuff?" I asked as I came up behind him, motioning to our gear. We still had our tent, the cooking supplies, the food, and everything else we took just lying about. "We don't need it," Dad said as he threw open the car door. "It's all That fucking screech cut him off. From the side of the car I saw it burst out and reared up. I only saw it for a few seconds, but it felt like more. It seemed to have enough time to see every detail. The reason why its blackish-brown fur looked to be in patches is because there were parts of its black skin that looked diseased and rotten. It was tall and scrawny with bones that jut out in a way that made them seem like they'd tear through the skin at any moment. It had a canine-like muzzle with jaws that opened into thick and sharp yellow fangs. It was reared up on thin black legs that ended up in elongated 3 toes that equipped with 3 long claws that dug deep into the earth where it stood. The 3-clawed hand rose and smacked my dad in the chin, causing him to flung back into the ground. 30-30 fell away from his grasp and landed in the soft dirt a few feet away from him. The creature then turned to me, those blood-red eyes focusing on mine as I looked up into its gaze. My mouth hung open in shock as it snarled down to me, sickly black-colored drool oozing from its jaws. I at least remembered my rifle and brought it up to point the barrel at it. The creature's arm shot out, hand grasping around the barrel despite its strength. I didn't think that scrawny form could have wrenched it out of my grasp and chucked it away from me. I backed up and was about to turn when it leapt. I felt a heavy form crash over me, sending me back into the hard dirt. I could smell it as it tackled me down. A stench of rotting flesh and dried blood assaulted my nostrils. I'm going to die now. God, I'm dead. That's all I could think as I saw it raise its clawed hand up. A loud sound echoed suddenly. The sound of something hard smacking into the flesh of the creature stumbled off of me. I looked at the moment and crawl away, panting heavily before I raised, looking back. I saw my dad standing there, both hands clutched together in front of him, after he apparently sent a hard haymaker into the back of the creature. Hell, I didn't know how he had enough strength left in him. The creature already recovered and rose back, this time hissing and screeching at my father. My dad glanced back at me. My breath caught in my throat. He wasn't hoping to beat it. He just wanted to distract it, get it away from me. My dad was going to let it kill him, to save me. The creature rose, struck out those claws at Dad. It struck him in the arms, leaving 3 gashes as my father fell backward to the ground. I needed to move. I needed to get up. I needed to run. He was going to sacrifice himself for me, and all I could do was sit there and stare as it happened. I pushed myself up with my arms locked on the scene before me. My hand brushed against something metal. I looked down to see my father's 30-30 lying next to me. The creature stepped forward and fell over my father, looming over him, pinning him to the ground. I yanked the gun up and readied it in my arms. If you can't help it, son, always find something to balance your gun on. Don't ever shoot it just holding it unless you have to. I adjusted my position, sitting down and raising my knees to rest the gun on them, like my dad did when shooting that deer. Dad yelled something at me. I thought it was run, but I couldn't hear it over the sound of the creature hissing. Relax, son. Close one eye. Keep focus on your target. I rolled my shoulders, forcing my muscles to relax, and closed one eye, letting the sight focus in the drooling head of that monster. The monster opened its mouth and screeched in front of my dad's face. Drooling oozed out and onto my father as my dad shut his eyes and turned away. Now, when you're ready, hold your breath. Don't hold it for too long or you're going to start shaking. Just enough. I took in a breath, held it as the gun steadying my hands as my breath halted for the moment. The creature's arm rose, claws lifted, ready to flay open my father. This is it. I had one chance. If I missed it, my dad would die. Then slowly squeeze the trigger like you're milking a cow. My fingers slowly squeezed down on the trigger as I tried my best to imagine what milking a cow would be like. The creature's claw hand fell downward. Bam! The shot rang out, and I could hear a sick, crunchy noise mixed with that of the splatter. The creature howled and lurched off my dad, its oversized hands grasping its head in pain. I could see what I thought was blood pouring out of the side of its deformed skull. Jerked around, stumbling on its feet before it turned and snarled at me. Then it took off, running back into the woods. I sat there in silence, panting as sweat poured down my face. Soon my eyes moved back to my dad. He was lying there, not moving. Swiftly, I rose and slid next to him. Dad! I cried out. Dad, come on! He blinked and stared at me before coming back. His arms rose and wrapped around me in a tight hug. I hugged him back and closed my eyes. We were okay. Both of us were okay. Soon my father let go and pushed himself up to his feet. He glanced back towards the woods as his hand rose to wipe some off of that foul-smelling drool away from his face. He began with a slight stammer, but before he lifted a hand and placed it on my shoulder. I taught you good. He spoke. I couldn't help but laugh out a small chuckle. He didn't waste any time. The two of us got into that car and drove. Neither of us said anything until the car pulled out of that winding, bumpy road and onto the solid highway nearly an hour later. I was the first to speak. What do you think it was? I asked quietly as my head turned toward him. I don't know, was the only thing I got in reply. What are we going to say about Sean? The truth. He was attacked by an animal. We shot it, but we think it got away. He sighed and hung his head. I knew he felt responsible for John, but it wasn't his fault. That thing, it's that thing's fault. And nobody would believe it if we said a monster got him. So, an animal. It had to be an animal. We were silent for a bit longer before I spoke in a quiet, nervous tone. What if that thing comes back? I asked as my eyes focused on my father. What if it follows you? Comes after us again? My dad did something surprising. He smirked. He smirked and shook his head. I'm not scared if it does. It surprised me. Gave him an odd look like he'd finally gone crazy. Dad, that thing took a bolt to the face and you're not scared of it? Son, he began as he glanced back to me, confident look on his face. You shot that thing in its head, and it howled and ran away. That means it was hurt. It means it was scared of getting hurt more. And if it's scared of getting hurt more, and that grin on his face grew wider, that means we could kill it.